Hi, I'm standing in front of the Betsey Mills Club where Vice President of the United States Charles Gates Dawes was born. The Betsey Mills was founded in 1911 under the same name, the Girls Monday Club. The Monday Club was the result of a sewing class started in 1898 in Marietta by Mrs. Betsey Mills and other community-minded women. The first permanent home of the Monday Club was the white frame house on the corner of 4th and Putnam Streets. The house was the birthplace of Mrs. Mills and also of her nephew, Vice President Charles Gates Dawes. The home was donated by Mr. and Mrs. West William Mills in 1916. The home became the nucleus of the present complex constructed by Mr. Mills as a memorial to his wife. The Betsey Mills, as you see it today, was dedicated on June 13th, 1927, and donated by Mr. Mills to the community of Marietta. I'm inside the Betsey Mills Club now, where Vice President Charles Gates Dawes was born, here in this room, August 27th, 1865. And as we can see over here, it's a photo. Charles Gates Dawes is standing all the way to the left. He's actually standing next to then U.S. President William Howard Taft. This photo was taken on June 15th, 1910. President Howard Taft is actually receiving an honorary degree of Doctor of Civil Laws from Marietta College President Dr. Alfred Tyler Perry. This occasion was commemorating Marietta College's 75th anniversary. Well, I'm standing in front of the Henry Fearing house. This is where Vice President Charles Gates Dawes courted his wife, Caro Blymyer Dawes. Let's go ahead and go inside. Well, my primary interest here is any information you may have to give in regarding Vice President Charles Gates Dawes in connection with his home, of course.
Oh, okay, good. Well, let's start here with this picture then. Charles Gates Dawes was born in Marietta and grew up here.
Yeah.
And we'll start with a picture of his family. And this is he, Charles Gates Dawes, is a young married man with his wife and first child. And with,
is that Caro Blymyer?
That's right. Caro Blymyer. It's C-A-R-O, Caro Blymyer.
Okay.
These are Mr. and Mrs. Blymyer, Caro's parents here.
Okay.
Mrs. Blymyer, in turn, was the daughter of Henry Fearing, who was the owner and resident of this house in the second half of the 1800s.
Okay.
This is General R.R. Dawes and his wife, Mary Beeman Gates Dawes, who were the parents of Charles Gates Dawes, who did become Vice President of the United States. This good lady is Mrs. Sarah Cutler Dawes. She is the mother of Mrs. General Dawes. Excuse me, she's General Dawes' mother.
Okay.
Sorry, misspoke. General Dawes' mother, and then her father in turn was Judge Ephraim Cutler, one of our early settlers and prominent figures, and she was the granddaughter of Manasseh Cutler, who negotiated for the Ohio Company of Associates the purchase of land here that resulted in the Marietta community. The remaining couple here are Mr. Beeman Gates, and his wife Betsey Shipman Gates, and they were the parents of Mrs. Dawes, and the grandparents of Charles Gates Dawes.
Okay.
And they had a large part in Marietta history too.
Okay.
And the setting of this picture is not this house, but is in front of the Dawes house on 4th Street 2 houses up from the St. Mary's Basilica, and presently owned and occupied by Dr. Hershey. This is a picture of Charles Gates Dawes as he looked when he was vice president. As a middle-aged adult, and the artist painted his portrait as though it were a sculpture.
Okay.
And which shows the back of his head in a mirror to the left, as well as the front of his head, his face, in the middle of the picture.
Yeah, that's kind of unique, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It is a sculpture. It is well, in the back, the front of it, that is a sculpture reflected in the mirror.
We have one story involving Charles Gates Dawes being in this house.
Okay.
You see, and that was the before he married Caro Blymyer, but before they married, but after he was very interested in her,
Right.
and he was visiting here in Marietta, his parents, and she was here visiting with her grandparents.
Keep your hand low, Kurt. If your hand is getting in the way of the lens of the camera.
You're fine. It points. It's good to point to who you're talking about. So.
She was, his wife, Caro Blymyer, was visiting here with her parents, and of course they were visiting her grandfather, Henry Fearing, in this house, and Charles Gates Dawes here wanted to call on her while he was here in Marietta. You see,
Yeah.
wanted another contact with her, and we know this story because this lady wrote a letter about it. That is, Charles' grandmother wrote a letter describing this story to the sister of this lady, and that letter survived, and we have it.
Here?
Yeah, she lived in Marietta. She wrote to her daughter, who lived in Illinois, describing what I'm going to tell you. Okay? So at that time,
Hey, can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
I know that VP Charles Dawes lived in Illinois. Did Caro have family there?
Yes, they had children there. This is their first child.
Oh. Okay. Well, yeah, they had their child there. Okay. Well, I know you said that lady over there already lived in Illinois. I didn't know if she had other family already there by any chance.
No, it was simply a coincidence that his aunt, the younger sister of his mother, and her husband were living in Illinois at that time.
Okay. I was just curious if that might have been maybe an influence of what may have drawn him there, perhaps. I don't know.
I've never heard that. In fact, they were returning from Illinois not too long after this, and then they lived. That was Mr. William W. and Mrs. Betsey Mills. They returned to Marietta and lived here the remainder of their lives from Illinois.
Oh, they did?
Yes, they went to. He was a banker, and he had his early banking experience in a town in Illinois. Then
Right.
he grew up here. Mr. Mills had an early job in Illinois. And
Mr. Mills?
Mr. William Mills, who was Mr. Gates here, the mother of Mrs. Dawes. Mr. Gates was the president of the Marietta National Bank. And when he retired,
Yeah.
his son-in-law, William W. Mills, came to Marietta to succeed him, and then was president of the bank until he died.
Okay.
Also.
Interesting.
And that was the uncle by marriage of Charles Dawes.
Okay.
Okay. So then, but getting back to their early courtship right here at this house,
Yeah.
in those days, it wasn't a simple thing of calling up and saying, would you like to get together, or anything like that. It was because it wasn't considered appropriate for unmarried people to be together unchaperoned. So there was communication between the two families. And it was decided that yes, Charles would come here to call on the woman that he was in love with, Caro Blymyer, but he would be accompanied by his mother, Mrs. Dawes, and his grandmother, Mrs. Gates.
Okay.
And Caro would, of course, would be here with the participation of her mother and her grandfather.
Okay.
So according to Mrs. Gates' letter, they had a wonderful time.
Yeah.
And this visit took place in these two rooms here, downstairs rooms.
Okay.
And they subsequently did marry, and they had over 50 happy years of marriage. It was a very successful marriage. And as you mentioned earlier, their married life was in Evanston, Illinois.
Okay.
We're now in the parlor of the Fearing House.
Okay.
The room that where when this meeting took place between Charles Gates Dawes and his wife-to-be, probably took place in this room. Although we don't know for certain whether this room or that room, but probably this room, which was the parlor, devoted to, and the purpose of the parlor was to have a room where company could be received that was ready at all times to receive company.
Yeah. Okay.
And this is an organ in a piano case here, and there's a piece of printed music called Melody by Charles G. Dawes, and one of Mr. Dawes had a lot of interests, and one thing he enjoyed though was music, and he actually composed a few numbers himself.
Okay.
And somewhere along the line he composed something he called Melody. And he, many years passed, you see, and he was roughly 90 years old, and somebody picked this up, Melody, and was attracted to it and published it, and it became a hit tune. Around 1950, at the very end of Mr. Dawes' life. He died in 1951, and this was the last part of his life that attracted public attention was this piece that he'd composed some years before, hit the charts, and they became known all over the United States as a hit tune.
What was the name of the tune?
Sorry, I can't tell you offhand.
The song was called "It's All in the Game."
Oh, okay. It's all in the game?
It starts, "Many a tear has to fall, but it's all in the game," I think is how the song starts. A lot of people have recorded it.
So this is the Vice President Charles Gates Dawes who wrote music in the Fearing House.